If it's Wednesday, President Trump says Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago, two high-profile Democrats, should be in jail. And a defiant Governor Pritzker responds, saying, quote, "Come and get me," as tensions escalate over the deployment of troops in the Windy City. Plus, former FBI Director James Comey is arraigned in federal court, pleading not guilty to allegations he lied to Congress, as he fights the charges and argues it's a case of vindictive political prosecution. And we'll hear from lawmakers in both parties, including a member of a Republican leadership, amid new tensions within the GOP over health care negotiations that are at the center of the ongoing government shutdown. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where President Trump is again testing the limits of his power and his ability to crack down on his rivals. Posting on social media today that Chicago's Democratic Mayor Brandon Johnson and Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker should be in jail, alleging they both have failed to protect ICE agents, but not saying what the crime is. The White House then doubling down with a statement saying J.B. Pritzker and Brandon Johnson have blood on their hands for failing to adequately protect Chicago, maligning them as Trump deranged buffoons. This all comes as federalized National Guard troops from Texas arrive in Chicago despite objections from local officials. Governor Pritzker responding to the president this afternoon during a live interview on MSNBC.
I got to say, this guy's unhinged. He's insecure. He's a wannabe dictator. And there's one thing I really want to say to Donald Trump. If you come for my people, you come through me. So come and get me. And I got to say, he can't arrest. We've done nothing wrong here. And very importantly, it's Donald Trump that is breaching the Constitution, breaking the law. We're taking him to court, and I believe we're going to win.
Now, we also just heard from the president at an event focused on fighting Antifa, a decentralized group of left-wing extremists, which the White House has used to paint the Democratic Party more broadly as an extremist organization. The president accusing officials from Illinois as well as Oregon of obstructing his immigration crackdowns.
Everything we're doing is very lawful. What they're doing is not lawful. And what the governor and the mayor of, as an example, you could say of Portland, and you can say certainly of Chicago, is not lawful what they're doing. They have to be very careful.
We should note those comments follow some incendiary rhetoric from the president, calling Democrats the party of Satan and comparing them to insurrectionists. And 5 sources now tell NBC News that the Trump administration is having increasingly serious discussions about invoking the Insurrection Act, which would give the president the authority to deploy active duty troops inside the U.S. for law enforcement purposes. The president's attacks against his rivals coming as another one of his political foes. Former FBI Director James Comey appeared in a federal courtroom pleading not guilty to 2 charges alleging he made false statements to Congress in 2020. And those charges coming just days after the president publicly pressured Attorney General Pam Bondi to pursue cases against his opponents, including Comey by name. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster joins me now from Chicago. I'm also joined by NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor and NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We should note that there's that ongoing event at the White House. We will dip into it once the president starts answering questions. But Shaq, let me start with you. What has been the reaction to the president's latest threats?
Well, you heard that strong comment from Governor J.B. Pritzker. You also saw a response on social media from Mayor Brandon Johnson, who, we'll pull it up on screen there, said, "This is not the first time Trump has tried to have a black man unjustly arrested. I'm not going anywhere." We know that there's also a lot of frustration from the city and state leaders because they don't know anything about this deployment. They're being left in the dark, they say. All that we know, according to the military, according to Northern Command, is that you have about 200 guardsmen from the Texas National Guard here, and then there's about 300 Illinois National Guard members that have been activated, but we don't know where they will ultimately be deployed, where they will be standing guard. You have the city and state leaders pushing back against the idea that you will see National Guard troops on Chicago streets.
And you've been talking to folks there on the ground, Shaq. What are people who live there saying, and what's the mood like since the Texas National Guard arrived yesterday?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say since the Guard arrived, there hasn't been a noticeable shift in the mood. There will be a protest here later today, but they're protesting not just the deployment of the Guard, they're also protesting Operation Midway Blitz, that increased immigration enforcement that we've been seeing throughout the city. And to that point, that is where you've been seeing a lot of the reaction, a lot of the fear, a lot of the anger, not just here in Chicago, but the surrounding suburbs. There's lots of videos that you're looking at online of masked ICE agents, masked agents with Border Patrol going around putting people in vans. We know that Broadview ICE processing facility has been the site of some clashes in the past. It's been quiet recently, but that is the frustration that you're hearing targeted at the immigration enforcement. Now it's a new element with the deployment of ICE. Again, we don't know where they will be stationed, but that is something that a lot of people are watching closely.
Well, certainly the epicenter of these tensions. Shaquille Brewster, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Arraigned, let me head over to you and ask you about this new reporting. 5 sources familiar with the matter telling our colleagues here that the Trump administration is having increasingly serious discussions about the president invoking the Insurrection Act. What more do we know about those conversations, and when do you think there could be a decision about this?
A good question on the timing. We're not sure. What we do know is that the president, as well as top advisors like Stephen Miller, have been talking more and more about the Insurrection Act. And the president has essentially been wanting to do this because he has at times been losing in court when it comes to trying to federalize these National Guard troops to send them into places like Memphis and Chicago and Portland. We also heard from the Attorney General Pam Bondi just a few moments ago at the White House. Take a listen to what she had to say.
The Biden administration let them commit these crimes with total impunity for years. So did Democrat leaders like Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson.
These leaders in these local cities, along with Pritzker and Johnson, ignore what's going on, or, sir, they're helping Antifa cover it up.
And as a result, you're seeing really White House officials making the case for the fact that they believe that things are just out of hand and that more needs to be done. So the president here could invoke this act again. We don't know when he could do this, but it could possibly be soon because we are seeing these court cases and him losing in these court cases, though the president has also been at least hinting at the idea that he might go all the way up to the Supreme Court, which has sided with him in other issues. But the president overall is making the case that there's too much crime, and he's also saying that there's also this sort of attack on federal buildings and especially immigration buildings that he really wants to deal with, Kristen.
And Arraigned, just finally, what more are your sources telling you at the White House about these extraordinary statements by President Trump saying that Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson should be jailed?
They are, Kristen, extraordinary statements. And White House officials have been sort of mum about what they might mean. The president there, as you said, Chicago mayor should be jailed for failing to protect ICE officers. Of course, also calling out the Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. But the president hasn't really said what more he could do. He's also not been clear about what they would be charged with, what rules they've been broken, or what laws they've broken. But we do know that, of course, the president has said stuff on social media and then carried it out. We also know that the president has been very clear that he wants the attorney general to go after other political enemies of his. So this is definitely something that we're watching closely and definitely going to see how serious the president is about this, Kristen.
Certainly we will be. Arraigned, thank you so much for your great reporting at the White House. Let's head over to Kelly O'Donnell now. So, Kelly, obviously you've been talking to your sources there at the Justice Department. In terms of tracking what the president said, these threats to jail Pritzker and Johnson, is this realistic? The president didn't even say what crime he was referring to.
We don't have any indication yet, Kristen, that this is something that is actionable from the Department of Justice. But as Arraigned pointed out, we have seen a pattern where the president uses what you could arguably call hyperbolic language and directs those who are in his government to take certain actions. This is stunning because it's about elected officials at the state and local level, and there is no specific discussion of what crime. There is a responsibility for elected officials to uphold the laws in their own state. This is really not typically the domain of the federal government. But when the president speaks out in this way, it certainly shines a lot of attention on these issues and can be either politically a useful tool for the president, and conversely, as we saw with Governor Pritzker, a way for him to turn it around and make a political argument. So at the moment, this is all in the zone of rhetoric. Kristen?
Yeah, it's a really important distinction, Kelly. And of course, we should ask you about the other story you are covering today. You're outside the courtroom where former FBI Director James Comey was arraigned today. He pleaded not guilty. Walk us through what happened and why this is such a significant moment.
Well, it is significant, and it really stands out in two ways: discussion of speed and strategy. The judge in this case, Michael Nachmanoff, said that he wants to move expeditiously. He does not want any issues related to discovery or other process issues to get in the way. He's not going to linger, he said. So January 5th, just 90 days from now, a trial date set. Then the question is, will it get to trial? And by that I mean we had what was a bit unexpected today, where Comey's counsel, who is Patrick Fitzgerald, who had been himself a very prominent U.S. attorney based in Chicago for many years, known for some of his national cases, he laid out his intention to argue that these charges against Comey should be dismissed based on a few key things, arguing that this is a vindictive prosecution, a selective prosecution, that there was abuse of the grand jury, and even that the appointed U.S. attorney in an acting role who came from the White House, a woman named Lindsay Halligan, an attorney but never a prosecutor. She was placed in the role here in the Eastern District of Virginia, challenging that appointment as unlawful. So the first step for the Comey defense is to say that the charges and the process up to this point are unlawful, unfair, and should be tossed out. We'll see the next steps, how that unfolds.
We certainly will. Very complicated proceedings there. Kelly, thanks for walking us through everything. Really appreciate it. I'm joined now by Jay Johnson, who served as Homeland Security Secretary in the Obama administration. He's also a former federal prosecutor and served as general counsel of the Defense Department. Secretary, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start first with this trial of James Comey. You heard Kelly there talk about the fact that Comey's attorney is trying to argue that this case shouldn't even go to trial. You obviously have worked with James Comey, but based on what you know, the facts of this case as we know them so far, what's been made public, do you believe this case is going to go to trial?
Well, there's going to be a lot of pretrial activity in this case, which is unusual for a federal criminal case. As you noted, I was a federal prosecutor. I worked alongside Jim Comey and Pat Fitzgerald when we were in the U.S. Attorney's Office, hired by Rudy Giuliani in the late 1980s, early 1990s. There will be a motion to dismiss this indictment for selective vindictive prosecution. Pat Fitzgerald, his defense attorney, is a very, very aggressive attorney. I expect they will seek discovery of emails, of text, going back and forth between the White House and the Department of Justice, which will take some time to litigate. These motions, these type of pretrial motions, are rarely granted, but in this case, it could be a particularly powerful, persuasive motion. The judge set a trial date of January 5. That's relatively fast, pretty fast. I don't expect that this case will go to trial on January 5. But knowing what I know about Jim Comey, I expect that he's looking forward to a trial if we get there, and is probably very anxious to testify and tell his story. And I suspect he will tell it well.
Secretary Johnson, can you explain for our viewers what exactly does vindictive and selective prosecution mean, and why might that be a persuasive argument?
That's a good question. Normally, a selective prosecution would be something in the nature of, you're singling me out because of my race or my religion, or because I exercise my free speech rights. A vindictive prosecution is based upon an improper motive. Here we have a situation that is probably almost unparalleled in American history, where the prosecution is undertaken after the president himself puts out a public statement saying this person should be prosecuted. With all sorts of highly, highly suggestive adjectives and so forth. So it'll be a very persuasive, powerful motion, but in many respects, it'll be unprecedented in American history. In this country, we do not prosecute people for political objectives or because of political vindictiveness, but the president himself has pretty much made that plain.
Well, and it's so critical to hear that broader historical context, Secretary Johnson. I do want to move on to what President Trump said today. arguing Chicago's mayor and Illinois governor should, quote, be in jail for failing to protect ICE officers. What is your reaction to that? And we've been stressing throughout the hour, he didn't say what exactly crime he thought was violated. What do you make of what he said?
Well, I doubt President Trump combed Title 18 of the United States Code before he came up with that. So no one knows what he's talking about. It's impossible to know what he's talking about. And frankly, I don't take it very seriously. It is important to point out the larger picture here, which is that the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes is highly, highly unusual in this country. In fact, I believe one of the reasons our U.S. military is so highly regarded and trusted by the American people is because we keep it cabined to overseas conflicts. It is extremely rare to invoke the Insurrection Act, which the president threatened to do now. And so there will be litigation, I'm quite sure, over that, just like there has been in Portland, Oregon.
Secretary Johnson, and you take me to my next question. Talk about why it's so rare that you would see the Insurrection Act invoked, and why would that be such a dramatic step by the president? Our reporting is, according to 5 sources, that there is some serious consideration of doing exactly that within the administration.
There's a principle in U.S. law called a posse comitatus. We do not deploy U.S. military for domestic law enforcement purposes on the streets of America, unless there's a specific statutory exception, like the Insurrection Act. Now, the Insurrection Act is very old. I think it's 1807, with a lot of antiquated language, so one could construe it in very broad terms. It prohibits, for example, unlawful obstructions or assemblages, whatever that means, and permits the president to call out the U.S. military to prevent such a thing from happening. But over time, it's been rarely invoked. I think it's also important to note that within the Department of Homeland Security, you've got the largest number of civilian gun carriers of any cabinet level department, larger than the Department of Justice, which includes the Federal Protective Service, which is a civilian law enforcement agency specifically for the purpose of protecting federal buildings and federal personnel. The judge in Oregon found that the invocation of the U.S. military here was not justified based on the facts. I don't know. I suspect the same is true in Chicago.
Let me ask you, Secretary, broadly about this moment that we are in. One of your focuses when you were head of DHS was countering domestic violent extremism. What do you make of where this country finds itself right now, this spike in political violence and, quite frankly, in inflammatory political rhetoric?
Political violence comes in waves, Kristen. I'm 68 years old. I remember the 1960s, where there was an assassination of a major political figure in this country almost once a year, from Medgar Evers, John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and then Robert Kennedy. Political violence, assassinations, attempted assassinations come in waves. One tends to inspire the other. And I fear we are in the midst of such a period right now. And this kind of environment calls for political leaders, those who command a microphone, on a bipartisan basis to denounce violence, not amp it up.
Well, Secretary Johnson, we really appreciate your being here to give us your perspective and that historical viewpoint, which is so critical right now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, the Senate votes to try to end the shutdown again and fails again as Democrats stay laser focused on health care and federal workers brace for potential layoffs. Plus, I'll talk to lawmakers from both sides of the aisle about the intensifying political pressure facing their parties. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The sixth time was not the charm today as yet another vote on a stopgap bill to fund the government failed in the Senate. The shutdown is now entering its second week and tensions are rising on Capitol Hill. A group of lawmakers, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, Arizona Democratic Senators Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego, and New York Congressman Mike Lawler engaged in a heated discussion outside the Speaker's office with cameras rolling. Take a look.
Why don't you bring back your Republican members so we can have a serious negotiation with them?
We're going to have plenty of negotiations as soon as you open the government.
You voted multiple times to keep the government shut down, okay? The Republican members from Arizona voted to keep the government open.
They did.
So don't sit here and try to lecture us about whether or not we did our job. We did our job. You did not. Oh, you mean the bill that I'm signed on to extend it? Oh, yeah, right. Because you know what? We actually have put forth legislation to do it. You guys just keep pontificating.
I imagine yours are going to be hurt even worse than ours
with
these premium increases.
We have a lot of issues to work on together, and the Republicans are the party. Wait a minute. Wait just a minute.
The party that's going to kill health care.
No.
That confrontation happening as both parties remain dug in and as Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene doubles down on her public break with her own party over the Affordable Care Act subsidies that expire at the end of the year, telling my colleague Ryan Nobles her party can't ignore the threat of rising premiums.
I'm not a fan of the ACA. I think it has largely hurt the health insurance industry, and I don't think it's an easy problem to fix either. What I am upset over is my party has no solution. It's not something that we talk about frequently, but it is a reality for Americans, and it's something that I don't think we can ignore. I really want to fix it.
I asked Speaker Johnson about that today, and he said that you just aren't aware of some of the work Republicans are doing on health care. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, he said I didn't serve on that committee of jurisdiction, and you know, it's really silly actually when you're the Speaker of the House and you want consensus in your conference to build support for an issue. You talk about it all the time. The reality is they never talk about it.
Joining me now from Capitol Hill is NBC's Melanie Zanona. So, Mel, break down this sixth vote. What happens now? Are these two sides having any conversations behind the scenes as far as you can tell?
Yeah, it's a really strange shutdown, having covered a bunch of these things, Kristen, because normally there would be late night work, there would be weekend work, people would be shuttling between offices for round-the-clock negotiations. We just have not seen any of that happening. The House isn't even here. The Senate is likely to go home yet again this weekend for the second time in a row during this shutdown. And the members who are here are getting into these heated confrontations in the hallways with one another. Now, I will say there are some pressure points or pain points that are fast approaching. This Friday, for example, federal workers are going to miss their first paycheck. Next week, troops, the military, they will miss their first paycheck starting on Wednesday. So perhaps that could create the sense of urgency that appears to be lacking right now, but that just has not happened. The Senate took yet another vote today that failed. The vote count has not budged. It's the same 3 Senate Democrats voting with Republicans to open the government, and so far just really no signs of progress whatsoever.
Well, the other pressure point, you have TSA officials starting to call out. You have delays starting to pile up. Of course, that's one of the pressure points that helped to end the shutdown back in 2019. What are lawmakers telling you, Mel? Are they starting to feel the heat from their constituents?
You know, there are a handful of rank-and-file members who are starting to break with the leadership. We saw a couple examples today, at least on the Republican side. Jen Kiggins, she's a vulnerable member from Virginia. She came out today against Mike Johnson's decision to not put a bill on the floor to give troops pay during the shutdown. She represents a district that has a lot of military members, so for her this is a really big issue. Also a number of federal workers as well. And then there was Kevin Kiley. He also represents a vulnerable competitive district in California. He came out and said he disagrees with Johnson's decision to keep members away from the Capitol. He canceled session once again this week. Looks like he might do that again. But for the most part, both parties are very united and very dug in right now.
It's just extraordinary. And what do you make of what we heard from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, what she told our colleague Ryan Nobles? How significant is what she's saying, Melanie? Could it be a sign that there could be a small crack forming in the Republican ranks?
Yeah, I think it is pretty interesting and fascinating. Obviously, Greene has been one of Trump's biggest cheerleaders. She has also emerged as a critic of her own party on a number of issues, from Gaza to the Iran strikes to Jeffrey Epstein, and now on this critical issue of health care. And Ryan and I did some really in-depth reporting about her and sort of what her motivations are. She has felt increasingly disillusioned with politics in her party, in part because she feels like she's been passed passed over for opportunities. But on the Affordable Care Act subsidies, she is really in tune with the MAGA base. There are so many Republicans that actually do rely on Obamacare to get their health care. And so I think Republicans want to ignore her, but they're doing so at their own risk.
All right. Well, I know you continue to track every twist and turn. Melanie Zanona, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We will be right back with more Meet the Press Now and my conversations with two lawmakers dealing with this shutdown. Stay with us. Welcome back. And joining me now is Wisconsin Democratic Congressman Mark Pocan. Thank you for joining me, Congressman. Really appreciate it.
Oh, glad to be here. Thank you, Kristen.
So let's talk about the state of play. Here we are 8 days into this shutdown. We're starting to see some of the effects mount, including missed paychecks. I just talked about the fact that TSA workers are starting to call out. How long are you and your fellow Democrats prepared to dig in and hold this position?
Well, the fight we have is an important one. Everyone in the country will be paying more for health insurance because of actions by the big ugly law. Right now, in the next couple of weeks, we're seeing people get their group plan increases. We're seeing the Affordable Care Act increases come out in places like Wisconsin on October 17th. But I was just told Friday night by an organization in my district that they just got their increase for their group plan for a business of 41%. So this is a real fight because of the actions the Republicans took. And I can tell you, when I go around my district and other districts, people are really concerned about health care. We don't directly feel the shutdown in places like Wisconsin. In fact, it didn't come up as a single question in 4 town halls yesterday, but health care certainly does.
Well, I guess at a certain point, are there concessions that you would be willing to make here?
Well, first, we need Mike Johnson to decide it's not our 3rd week of paid vacation. He needs to have us come in. We still haven't done a farm bill that's been overdue since 2023. We've got a bunch of other reauthorizations of bills to do, but we can't do any of that work when we're sitting at home, which is why I've been active. In fact, I went into my neighboring Republican district because I've had time on my hands. But we should be in Washington negotiating like we always have in the past. Just staying home and waiting for Donald Trump to tell us what's acceptable is not acceptable. And it's not going to solve anyone's healthcare problems, and it's not going to solve the shutdown.
I want to play an exchange that Minority Leader Jeffries had and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
There's a bipartisan bill in the House that's been introduced to do a 1-year extension of these ACA subsidies. Is that acceptable to you, and how would you vote if that came out?
A 1-year extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits is not acceptable. It's a non-starter. It's a non-starter.
That was a question posed there by my colleague Sahil Kapoor. But based on what Leader Jeffries said, are you concerned that Democrats are risking letting the perfect be the enemy of the good?
No, I think what he's saying is people who live inside the Beltway think differently than the rest of the country. The rest of the country thinks the way we operate with these little short-term extensions and we don't just get our work done is pretty ridiculous. And saying you're going to give health care for 1 more year, but after that, nothing, isn't solving the problem that currently exists. They created a problem in the big ugly law that's going to jeopardize 15 million people's health care. They'll have no health care potentially, and everyone's going to get a rate increase because of what they did, just like that firm that got a 41% rate increase for next week. So Hakeem is just saying, no, we're fighting to get this done. We're not going to play Washington swamp politics, which is exactly what Donald Trump is doing right now with this. And we want to make sure that we're solving the problem, not one more Band-Aid on a gaping wound like we do all too often in Washington.
Let me ask you for your take on what we heard from Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She told my colleague Ryan Nobles that her party doesn't have a solution on health care and that she does want to fix to these ACA subsidies. What was your reaction to hearing that? Do you think it could suggest there are some cracks forming?
Yeah, I'll give her credit. She's saying out loud what a lot of other Republican members are saying privately. Clearly, they don't have a plan. They haven't had a plan since Trump was in office the first time, and they still don't have a plan. So Mike Johnson keeps saying they're the ones doing stuff about healthcare. They don't have a plan a decade later for healthcare. You can't just take away healthcare without having a plan in place. So that's why we're saying, look, you broke a bunch of things. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt, saying you're just realizing that you made some mistakes, but fix it. In addition, they have a $500 billion cut to Medicare. That's going to affect every single person in the country because of the big ugly law, because they didn't fix that. There's a lot of work that has to happen, but you can't do it with us not in Washington. And, it's time that we get back to work.
Let me ask you, because in 2019, you accused President Trump of using federal workers as, quote, hostages during the shutdown back then. What would you say to your constituents, to other Americans who might level the same accusation against you and Democrats for making these demands when Republicans have, in fact, passed a bill to open the government?
Yeah, well, even federal workers agree with what we're saying. They're saying we have to take care of the healthcare situation. And it's very selfless. I mean, the fact that they're doing these jobs under all the attacks they've had this year. But Donald Trump has been firing federal employees illegally all year. He's been doing things against federal employees all year that have been illegal actions that have brought lawsuits. They understand who's on their side. But they understand that if American people are paying more for healthcare on top of the Trump tariff taxes that's making us pay more for groceries and durable goods, on top of the increased energy costs because of what they did in the big ugly law against the Inflation Reduction Act subsidies, on top of the fact that we're still paying more for housing. Look, everyone's paying more for everything. Donald Trump promised to fix that. He didn't. And to add healthcare to that, that's just one more burden people can't do.
We continue to see 3 lawmakers, 2 Democrats, 1 independent, vote with Republicans to keep the government open. Are you confident that your conference will stay united? How concerned are you there could be more defections?
Yeah, again, I think that's a little inside DC Beltway conversation. What I'm concerned about is what can we do to bring the Republicans back to a table, they're not negotiating right now, to actually talk about health care. And I understand there's a lot of folks in the Senate who've been there for a long time who remember the way things traditionally worked. But guess what? Donald Trump is anything but normal. This is not normal times. And because of that, we got to figure out how to bring the Republicans back. For Mike Johnson not to even have a House Republicans there. I went last week. It was pretty empty hallways, but you got to have both parties show up if you're going to be real about negotiating. Otherwise, the American people are way smarter. It doesn't pass the smell test that they're somehow doing the right thing when they won't even show up to work.
I want to ask you about the other big headline we've been tracking throughout the day, these efforts by the Trump administration to deploy the National Guard to Chicago, to Portland. Democratic leaders have had mixed success in challenging the deployments. But beyond the courts, do you believe there is anything Democrats should be doing to push back?
Well, the courts have been our best place of having the right fight back. We've had a lot of positive adjudications in the lawsuits against Donald Trump. He does stop doing things when the courts say to it, by and large, and that is the best tool we have right now. But, elections have consequences. There's very little that we could do legislatively short of in the House a discharge petition. We're one signature away from getting the Epstein files, and that's why maybe that's part of the reason Mike Johnson doesn't have us coming in and why he won't seat Ms. Grijalva, who just was elected in Arizona. But, this is something that, again, when I'm going around doing these town halls, people can see what's going on. Donald Trump is just going back to his comfort spots where he likes to create fear among people because that's how he can best control people. But what people really get afraid of right now is that they're not going to have health care for their family, or their neighbor's not going to have health care, or the kid in school that's a friend of your child doesn't have health care. Because people actually care about other human beings, and they've figured out Donald Trump and the Republicans, and that's why I think they're going to have to figure out what their next move is, because right now they are not winning this public relations battle.
All right, Congressman Pocan, thank you so much for your time and your perspective. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, the chair of the House Republican Conference responds. Congresswoman Lisa McClain is standing by with the view from GOP leadership. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We just heard from a Democratic lawmaker. Joining me now for the view from the other side of the aisle, chair of the Republican Conference, Congresswoman Lisa McClain of Michigan. Congresswoman McClain, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, we really appreciate your being here. I do want to get to the shutdown in just a moment.
Sure.
But first, I want to ask you about President Trump's social media post. Got a lot of attention today. He said he wants Chicago's Mayor Johnson and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to be jailed. Congresswoman, do you agree with that language?
Listen, if somebody commits a crime, I think they should be put in jail. So I think what the president's trying to do, and I don't want to speak for him, is, again, I think he's just trying to get everybody's attention. Listen, we need to get back to law and order. We need to get back to safe communities. That's really what we need to focus on here, is let's do what we can to make our communities safer.
Just very quickly, though, as far as you know right now, given the information that's publicly available, do you think that Mayor Johnson and J.B. Pritzker have committed a crime?
Yeah, I'm not the judge, I'm not the jury, so I really don't want to comment on that, but I don't know. I'd say let the process play out. I believe in due process, and let's see where it takes us.
Let me ask you, because according to our reporting, apparently there's some real consideration of invoking the Insurrection Act inside the White House. We've heard President Trump was asked about it, has talked about it a little bit. Would you be comfortable with that, or do you think that takes his law enforcement efforts too far?
You know, I think our ladder's on the wrong wall on this when we talk about this. Listen to what we're talking about. We have cities that are so violent right now that you think in America it looks like a third world country. What we should be doing is having a conversation about how to make these cities safer, right? I'm not a big proponent of defunding the police. I'm not a big proponent of bringing the National Guard. We shouldn't have to do that. But yet here we are because ICE agents are getting shot at. That shouldn't happen in America. Yet it is, and it's extremely unfortunate. What we should be doing is we should be making sure that our cities are safe, and if we can't keep them safe, we should be asking for help, like what happened in D.C., right? I live in D.C. My daughter lives in D.C. Unfortunately, since we had to send the National Guard into D.C., unfortunately, crime rates and murder rates have gone down dramatically. I mean, we're celebrating a fact that we went 11 days without having a murder in D.C. Really, that's what we're celebrating? We need to get back to law and order.
And it's just worth noting, crime rates had been actually dropping in D.C. before the Guard was sent in. They're actually down in Chicago, 23% overall violent crime, 46.7% homicide. So just to make that point, they are dropping.
But I think you would, I don't think you would disagree with me that we still have a crime problem in Chicago. I don't think that's what you're assessing.
There's no doubt that crime is a major issue for a lot of folks all across this country. But I just want to make that point that if you look at the statistics, it actually shows crime is decreasing. I do want to go ahead, and then we'll talk about the shutdown. I was going to say, let's talk about the statistics in D.C. Prior to President Trump sending the National Guard in, D.C. had a murder every other day. When the National Guard came in, we had 11 days. No murders, right? And again, my point is, it's still bad, right? We got to do better for the American people. Okay, well, and the debate over what to do about it specifically continues on, but I do want to talk about the government shutdown, Congresswoman. ACA subsidies, of course, at the center of this shutdown. Your colleague, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, in an interview with my colleague Ryan Nobles, said she wants Republicans to do a better job of addressing health care. She wants Republicans to have a plan. You are in leadership. What would you tell her?
Yeah. She's right. We need to do better with health care. There is absolutely no question. We shouldn't have people who are earning $600,000 a year getting ACA subsidies. I don't think that makes sense, right? But how we do that, I disagree with your premise that this is a health care fight. This is a funding fight. This is not a health care fight. It's not an ag fight. It's not a transportation and infrastructure fight. This is a funding fight, and that's what we need to do. We need to open the government so we can have these debates to fix health care and make health care more affordable for the American people. No question about that. But we can't do that while the government's shut down.
And Democrats are arguing, look, these subsidies expire at the end of the year.
Yeah,
Kaiser estimates the number of uninsured people in your state, Congresswoman of Michigan, would rise by about 390,000 if these tax credits expire. What do you say to your constituents who are worried they could lose coverage?
call your Democratic senators and tell them to please vote yes on the continuing resolution that they voted on 13 times prior, that funds the government at the exact same levels that they voted for, which were Democratic levels, so we can have these debates and we can fix the problem. That's what I would say to my people. Please call your Democratic senators and tell them stop holding you hostage and open up the government.
You know, I have the opportunity to interview you. I interviewed Congressman Pocan, both of you pointing fingers at each other. For the folks sitting at home watching this who are desperate for a solution for those hundreds of thousands of furloughed workers, are there any negotiations behind the scenes? Do you feel any responsibility as a part of Republican leadership to get this resolved?
Yeah, well, what I'm happy, we did our job in the House. We passed the continuing resolution so that our troops would get paid. Our people that are on WIC would continue to receive their benefits. So I'm very happy that we did our job in the House to pass a continuing resolution to make sure the government was open. Now it's in the hands of the Senate, and you stated earlier that we had some members cross over, and I think you'll see more, especially after the 13th or the 15th, when actually workers don't receive a paycheck, which is actually devastating for those workers. We, Republicans, voted to have them get paid. But just remind everybody, the Democrats voted no to shut the government down and not let them have pay. And they're using this as a hostage situation on the backs of the American workers.
But Congresswoman, can you say that Congress is doing its job, that the House is doing its job when you are literally out of session right now? Should House Speaker Mike Johnson call everyone back so that at the very least you can negotiate and start having those urgent conversations?
So here's the issue. There's nothing to negotiate. And I think this is a very important point that gets mixed. Typically, the party in charge, the party in the majority, does a CR, and what they do is they put a lot of policy riders in that CR. Usually they're partisan, right? We didn't do that. So there's nothing to negotiate. We said no gimmicks, no partisan policy riders. Let's just pass a clean CR so we can continue to govern for the American people. And what I might remind everybody is, what is everyone doing in D.C.? There's nothing to negotiate. We've negotiated. We do have this thing called a district work period, and people actually can be, and Republicans, I can share with you, are actually in their districts working for their constituents. So you don't have to be in D.C. to do your job. You actually can be in your district working, and that's a lot of what we're doing.
All right, Congresswoman Lisa McClain, I know there is a lot of urgency for the government to reopen. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to go right to the president. He is taking questions at the White House. Let's listen in.
Might go to Gaza, and then the second question I had earlier today, you said the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois should be jailed. Have you asked the Justice Department to look at possible charges?
No, I've seen the law, and when you have a group of people where the police call off the safety for ICE officials, I've understood that, and I've read it today in numerous journals, that that's illegal. What they did is I guess it was ICE, Christie, right? And the police were helping beautifully, and it was fine. And then all of a sudden, a woman was on the line saying, "Everybody, move back, get out, get out." And they were given an order by the second person in the police department, and the governor knew about it, the mayor knew about it. I understand that's a criminal offense. Do you want to comment on that, Christie?
Yes, sir, we're seeing that kind of pattern happen with local law enforcement and state law enforcement, not just in Illinois, but also out in Oregon, too. In fact, in Portland, I was there yesterday, but some of the ICE officers were telling me that as they drove by the rioters that were saying, "Kill ICE agents, Molotov cocktails, melt ICE," that the Portland police were cheering them on and had their fists in the air cheering on the rioters that were threatening their lives. So in Chicago, we had a 10-car caravan trail our ICE officials and pin them down. And those ICE officials, to get out of their vehicles, a woman tried to ram them and run them over, and shots were fired to get them to safety. So it's happening on a regular basis, and any elected official that allows this to happen and gives cover to those kind of individuals who are perpetuating murder should absolutely be prosecuted, in my opinion.
Mr. President.
Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And by the way, we have Marco Rubio. Marco, come on up here, please. He's going to bring a little stability to this group. Come on up. Does everybody know Marco Rubio? Is there anybody that doesn't? Some of the reporters don't. That's why they shouldn't be reporters.
Which job is he here for today,
Come
sir?
on up here, Marco. Anything we should know about the Middle East?
That's what we're hoping to talk to you about here, Mr. President.
He's doing a good job. He was born for this job, I can tell you. Daniel, please.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I have two questions for you, if that's okay. Seamus talked a little bit about the money aspect of this. Do you believe if you go after where the money is coming from with Antifa, in regards to Antifa, do you believe that would be similar to cutting the head off the snake, so to speak? And
it would help. I don't know that it would be totally complete, but it would certainly, you'd knock out 75%, 80%, 85%. These people, a lot of them don't believe it. You know, when I watch them, I say, I can almost tell a pro by, they're like professionals. That's all they do. And they get paid by somebody. I think it would knock out a lot of it. Yeah, not all of it maybe, but a lot of it.
And then a follow-up to that is a lot of the people who we've listened to over the last hour, they've emphasized that Antifa, it's not necessarily this big organized thing. It's a bit ambiguous. It's de-organized. I think that's one of the words that Andy used. What is the challenges of going after a group that makes it intentionally difficult to go after and find? That could be for you, the Attorney General, anyone up there.
Well, they're smart people, and they deceive. A lot of them are crooked people. A lot of them have been staying out of trouble their whole lives, and they've been bad from the day they were born, frankly. But these are sick people. Pam, go ahead, please.
Well, they're smart, but they're not smart enough. Oh, my microphone's broken. They're smart, but they're not smart enough. They have been covered by these liberal cities for so many years. And that's why we're all working with Treasury, with all these different departments, to find the criminal conspiracy.
Okay. I'm just giving. Yeah, I was just given a note by the Secretary of State saying that we're very close to a deal in the Middle East, and they're going to need me pretty quickly. So I will take a couple of more questions. Please.
Thank you, sir. I also have two questions for you, if I may. Have you given any more thought to possibly suspending habeas corpus to not only deal with these insurrectionists across the nation, but also to continue rapidly deporting illegal aliens?
Yeah, it's suspending who?
Habeas corpus, sir.
Oh, I don't know. I'd rather leave that to Christie. What do you think?
No, sir, I haven't been a part of any discussions on that.
All right, go ahead.
In the ceasefire
This is CNN speaking, by the way. So,
are you personally
this is
participating?
one of the worst reporters that you'll ever. I don't even want to take a question. It's a waste of time. Go ahead.
How will you decide which workers get back pay and which workers do not?
Well, we're going to see. Most of them are going to get back pay, and we're going to try and make sure of that. But some of them are being hurt very badly by the Democrats, and they therefore won't qualify. Go ahead, please.
What will the administration do to foreign Antifa organizers and funders who are located overseas?
Go ahead. In the yellow, please.
So the Nobel Peace Prize will be announced on Friday. You've been nominated by many world leaders.
By many, many countries. That's
by many
right.
countries, as well as the hostage families. Do you think you will win?
I have no idea. I mean, look, I did settle. Marco would tell you we settled 7 wars. We're close to settling an 8th. And I think we'll end up settling the Russia situation, which is horrible. 7,000 people died last week, by the way, in Russia, between Russia and Ukraine. I think we'll settle that. So I don't think anybody in history has settled that many, but perhaps they'll find a reason not to give it to me, you know? Perhaps they will. Thank you.
Going to the shutdown quickly, what is your position on the extension of health care subsidies, which is what Democrats are asking for?
All I want to do is very simple. I want to get the country open, and then we're going to discuss that. And we'd like to, Obamacare is a horrible mess, and it has been from the beginning. We want to make it better, stronger, even if it costs more money, we want to make it better. The Democrats want to make it worse. The Democrats want to approve health care for illegals coming into our country, many of them coming in from prisons and mental institutions and drug dealers. They want to give them health care. We don't want that for our people because that's going to destroy the health care that we already have. We'd like to make Obamacare better for people, less expensive and better health care. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. President.
I'm wondering if you've been briefed on the organization and funding of Antifa, and if so, what have you learned?
I have been, and they have pretty good knowledge, but they're going to have a very good knowledge. And I really ask these very brave patriots that we're surrounded with today to let us know, because I think you probably have some pretty good ideas. And even if you're not sure, let us know and we'll figure it out. Okay?
And you've been listening to President Trump taking questions at the White House. The biggest headline coming out of that, you heard his Secretary of State, or you saw him hand him a note, and then President Trump saying at the aftermath of that they believe they are very close to getting a deal in the Middle East. The president announcing that he is likely planning to travel to the region this weekend, and so really set the stage for what appears to be an urgent situation in the Middle East as it relates to the critical talks that are unfolding there. Let me go to the White House now with Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, I know you've been tracking the president's comments along with me. He was also asked about the government shutdown. Is he willing to negotiate with Democrats on those health care subsidies that they want to see extended? They expire at the end of the year. The president saying, yes, he's willing to negotiate, but first they have to reopen the government. What were your other key takeaways, Yamiche?
Well, I think go back to the fact that this Middle East trip may be happening. The president saying he's likely to go to the Middle East, likely to go to Egypt as these negotiations to end the war in Gaza look closer and closer to actually being done, which would, of course, be a huge deal given the fact that this is a war that has killed so many people, including women and children. So the president really signaling that this is going to be something that he wants to be there in person for. The president also took a question of whether or not he would consider traveling into Gaza, which would, of course, be a remarkable and historic trip if he were to do that. The president leaving the door open to that. So we will be watching that trip to see if that's happening. Also important to talk about the shutdown and other things, but I know we got to go here, Kristen, so I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, great roundup, Yamiche. Thank you so much for tracking that along with me. We appreciate it. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but there's a lot more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.